I think to start, we should go straight in. And the first question we came up with from the readings is why are there inequalities in the global food system and how have they developed over time? In relation to why, Karl Marx originally believed capitalism by nature will cause inequalities throughout society. Kloppenberg explained Marx's views in his book First the Seed, which shows how concrete historical processes in the development of plant breeding have shaped the current food system we see. Marx believed that the technological innovation in any sector would lead to inequalities being produced.
Okay, Archie, so I understand why Marx had these views, but doesn't the fact that the family farms have not been replaced show that Marx's theory on class differentiation was flawed and his views were incorrect?
Yes, yeah, you're exactly right. Marx believed that all the family farms would have been replaced by large capitalist ones. But where he was wrong is that even though the number of farms has decreased, they have not been replaced by capitalist farms based on the principle of wage labour, like Marx said they would.
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned the family farm because since the 1970s, there has been a decline in family farms and an increase in the large commercial farms. Gonzalez's 2002 paper on institutionalizing inequality went into detail on interactions and connections within and between countries around the emergence of the Agreement on Agriculture. The primary aims of the Agreement on Agriculture were to refine the principles of agricultural policy and reduce the distortions in agricultural trade caused by agricultural protectionism and domestic support. But often more powerful and developed countries, including the EU and US, managed to find ways to exclude themselves from these legislations, instead able to manipulate the legislations to harbour their own interest and specifically gain protection.
Yeah, so this agreement on agriculture essentially gave a green go-ahead light, telling former colonies to liberalise their industries. However, they weren't able to access the same levels of protection countries like the US received when they were industrialising, an action Chang refers to as kicking away the ladder. The IMF's structural adjustment programs were presented as a solution to food insecurity, yet in reality, it appears they've done more to weaken the global south and prevent protectionism into these countries than support growth and success.
Yeah, in addition to countries in the global north having significant influence over the IMF, powerful states like the US were able to undertake price distortions, where could physically control the value of food commodities in the global market. The most notable way this occurred was through the subsidization of American farmers to produce more crops than they normally would. As a result, the value of crops plummeted, which had no impact on American farmers due to the well-established protection they had through government subsidies, yet it crippled farmers in LEDCs.
It appears then states which had protection were safe and successful, but those who were already crippled by the IMF structural adjustment programme suffered further.
I agree. It appears that the concept of being within an established network of power is key to maintaining control. I see parallels between what we are discussing and the work of David Ricardo's comparative advantage, in which some more developed organizations take greater benefit when others are stuck selling lower value commodities. It seems the Agreement on Agriculture did not make a fairer neoliberal system. Now, as we've advanced into the 21st century, Marxist ideas of a bourgeoisie epoch seem to be holding true, as there has been a reconfiguration of global agropower, in which there is this oppressive class consisting of large organizations involved in agrochemicals, which we refer to as gene giants, and they're controlling the rest of society through the idea of intellectual property rights. Peter Dreyhus talks about this in his 1996 book, where he highlights the privileges which these gene giants have access to and which other smaller scale farmers are excluded from. The gene giants control opportunities to compete in commodity markets by imposing minimum standards and also having the power to essentially cut off entire regions from their products, which in this case is food, as and when they see fit.
So there are still winners and losers and not equality.
I recognise there are different ways in which power is created and control is present. And I agree with Thea, this is because these controlling borders are embedded in interconnected, complicated systems and networks, which offers them multiple levels of protection.
Yeah, exactly, Archie. And I believe when having this discussion, we need to acknowledge that as well as control being founded on well-established networks, there is power coming from an array of different organizations with potentially opposing motivations. In the instance of GM crops, Kloppenberg provides an insight into the fact TNCs like McDonald's and Heinz felt the need to stop using GM crops after intense negative media coverage circulated. It seems power goes hand in hand with knowledge. TNCs were happy to undertake business operations using GM crops when the public were unaware of potential health and ecological benefits that are encompassed with the production of genetically modified organisms. But once media outlets were broadcasting the previously exclusive knowledge to inform the public, operations soon halted for risk of new knowledge having a detriment on their sales. The more people who hold a certain type of knowledge, the less power and control can be associated with it.
Therefore, linking back to the question, I think it's clear to see that the reason there are so many inequalities in the system is because the system needs exploitation to make it operate. In the past, the more advanced countries needed their raw materials from the less developed countries to operate. Likewise, governments started to marginalise the family farm, meaning it's harder and harder for them to survive. And now the issue continues through a few dominating gene giants. Perhaps Marx was correct, and the growth in biotechnologies has simply just increased inequality between the classes, because one class must monopolise the means of production and rule over the other.
From reading chapter 11 of Kloppenberg's 2004 paper, which discussed the issue of large biotechnology companies, which we refer to as gene giants, such as Syngenta and Monsanto, who dominate and control the market through their interconnected networks of dependence. As a member of civil society, I'm left to question, is it possible to move away from a controlling society to achieve sustainability? Is there a way members of the public can trust any products or organizations which claim to be sustainable? Kloppenberg himself identifies that sustainability is in fact now a rhetorical and ideological touchstone. Holden, Leonard, and Bannister identify that the aim of sustainability is to reverse the negative impacts of contemporary modernity on social equity, human well-being, and ecological integrity. And while I agree this is sustainability's inherent goal for current and future generations, an aloofness remains central to the discussion of sustainability. Even the SDGs themselves are vague in outlining how states can achieve sustainability. So when I encounter an organization who claim to be sustainable, I do find myself being skeptical over how exactly have they decided to award themselves that statutory label.
Well, interestingly, Sterling in 2019 argued that there are attempts to control what the concept of sustainability really is. It is not viewed as a targeted ambition for the good it can ecologically and socially provide, but is instead a weapon which has the potential for significant economic gain, or a determinant to financial investors. Therefore, the topic of sustainability is one which is inherently political, which harbours vested interest, and is one which must be discussed in what he refers to as war rooms.
Yeah, I believe members of the public should veer on the side of caution when interacting with or purchasing from organisations who use the trending and tweetable term of sustainability. There's been multiple instances of greenwashing of late through industries from food to fashion, such as H&M, who launched a supposedly conscious collection, but have been caught employing children to work in factories in Myanmar for as little as 13p an hour.
Organisations undertake these greenwashing activities, appropriate environment comments for private profit, which in turn perpetuates the idea of the controlled and the controlling. Well, before we discuss control in terms of limiting what people, specifically farmers, can and can't do, I believe control is apparent here in modern society. However, it's slightly in a different form, as large organisations are the oppressive bourgeoisie class, as Marx would say. These few selected large organisations present themselves as morally good to entice the public to consume their items. However, these items are often not as sustainable as what is presented, and thus in turn, the public are controlled, persuaded, and misinformed into purchasing items which lie on the fabricated claims of sustainability.
So, is sustainability even possible?
I think that's a really good question, Harry. And in an attempt to provide an answer to this large question we've been talking about, I think it's really challenging. We've got methods to consider of who's being controlled and who's controlling, and who isn't acting sustainable. Organizations can easily give themselves brand labels and claim to be sustainable, but these are fabricated and often extravagant terms. Sustainability is an issue due to unequal access to resources. Scarcity for one is abundance for another. However, Scroons identifies responsible consumption as a solution to this. Changing relations is not a simple task, as discussed by Erna Burnett, so one must question if it's even possible to undertake such a dramatic paradigm shift in societal outlook. But if it is, moving to achieve sustainability seems to be possible by standardizing responsible consumption.
Yeah. One of the main questions that arose from the readings was, are we actually able to develop sustainably within a caring society committed to conviviality? Firstly, the Aurora reading alludes to the importance of moving away from modern controller society and uses a decent amount of examples to highlight that point, i.e. supporting communities to harvest their own energy, such as wind energy at a micro scale.
This point is also backed up by the Devi Sridhar reading, where she discusses an attempted food policy called the Tamil Nadu Integrated Nutrition Programme, which embodies a technicist, sectoralised subfield of nutrition, and that is quite representative of the modern controlling approach discussed by Aurora. So the TNIP was championed by the World Bank and was looked at in 4 communities in Chennai, but failed in many of the aspects of its goals. It failed in nutrition counselling, growth monitoring, and only was mediocre in nutrition outcome. This is also linked to the idea of categories in the Aurora reading, as the World Bank ignored the role of class and gender discrimination as major forces shaping nutrition outcomes, which is typical of the controlling society that Aurora described.
I believe this reinforces what we were discussing earlier regarding the GM crop scandal in McDonald's and in Heinz. There seems to be an inherent link between control and knowledge, as Gordon and Conaway identified. In the realm of plant biotechnology, a small authoritarian minority have been dictating the needs of what kind of research is permissible and what type of technology and products should be available in the marketplace. In Kloppenberg's chapter 11, he shows how science is manipulated to fit into networks of global commodities. Technology is not neutral, instead there is a politics to it. Terminator technology, which is technology specifically designed by gene giants to sterilize seeds so that after they've had one successful harvest, they die out, which forces farmers to return to market and purchase more, is a way of controlling farmers. And this falls into the first three distinctive classifications identified by Aurora, that of control and the politics of technology for sustainability. This explicitly shows the greed of agro-corporate businesses and also the clear distinction between them and the ideas of care, for biodiverse crops would likely be better for the environment. This, therefore, leads to a similar conclusion from both of these papers that in order to develop sustainability, there is a need for caring societies that are framed on justice and equality within a community rather than a hierarchical system of control.
Yeah, I agree, but I really don't see the world heading this direction at all. Two examples I can think of off the top of my head, Brexit and COVID. Not really food related, but I think they highlight the point quite well. With Brexit, one of the main slogans of the Leave campaign was "Take back control." This shows how on a national scale in the UK, we are against this practice for a caring society, which is what the Aurora reading highlights. Yeah.
With COVID, we see how we are not caring. I just found some quick stats and found that back in May, of the 1.3 billion vaccine doses given out worldwide, only 1% were in Africa, which is shocking and worrying. Whilst many parts of the world have none, in the UK we're giving out boosters. I think it really highlights how we are as a country not really caring. COVID is an issue that will not go away until everyone in the world is cured. Yet when given the option, we'd prefer to take a vaccine for ourselves rather than donate it to someone in Africa somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. During the summer, I actually worked at a vaccine centre, and towards the end of the summer, when boosters were starting to come out, some of the staff there were saying how they were going to leave due to the unethical practice of us all receiving a booster rather than it being given to a person in a low-income country, which I think these both examples really highlight the inequality here. But it also raises the question, is the world still able to develop sustainably within this system? And also, what is the actual feasibility of a caring society? I think it would be very difficult to develop if we move towards a caring society, firstly because we're likely to lose out on comparative advantage. If communities are so much smaller and need to provide everything for themselves, I think it makes it really difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it only takes one player in the system to not abide by the values of the community for it not to work. Further to this, Aurora uses the example of wind turbines and how they are more representative of a caring and convivial society. But I get the impression that in order to build wind turbines, there is a supply chain that corporations are in control of to a certain extent, with a level of politics involved, for example, something like Brexit. Therefore, in order to shift towards this type of society, there needs to be some kind of political change towards a glorifying agency of autonomous collectors producing decolonial ways of thinking, as well as a commitment to democracy and equality.
But as we saw with the Brexit example, it feels like we are moving away from this. It feels, therefore, like it's unrealistic to develop within this caring and convivial society.
So now let's move to wrap our thoughts up. Thea, anything you wish to reinforce?
What is clear to me is that control and its associated power is established and reciprocated through interconnected networks. The organisations we see today as controlling are not solely independent. Instead, they are supported and protected by networks of smaller organisations, types of research and government policies. Furthermore, society has been preconditioned to perpetuate the idea of a few domineering elites controlling the rest of society.
Very interesting. And the best way society has at dismantling this control is through an increased awareness of these operations that these large TNCs do.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm left with the question, is a controlling society necessarily a bad thing? After all, it's all that we really know, to be honest.